Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our second part of our three-part series on realigning your business during a crisis. I'm Jacques Gauthier with Carpedia International. Today's talk will be hosted by Andrew Rush, also of Carpedia, and is specific to how to manage your business to better drive performance in these crisis times. By way of an introduction, Carpedia has been around for 25 years and has done over 900 engagements with a lot of different businesses. So we're hoping that the experience that we've gleaned in these areas over the past 25 years are going to prove to be helpful and give you a couple of takeaways by the end of this presentation, hopefully make your business a little bit better as well. So without further ado, turn it over to Andrew Rush. Andrew?
Thank you, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. It's been my experience that managers aren't very good at managing, and that's not a criticism of them. It's because we as leaders haven't given them the tools and the skills required to be successful. And last week I talked about the challenges that business leaders have planning. Layer on top of the fact that managers aren't good innately at managing. It's very difficult to put together concrete plans, and we have very high levels of anxiety amongst employees and managers. It's a pretty high expectation of people to try and manage, maintain engagement, and drive the business forward. But today what I'm going to do is share with you a framework for making yourself and your managers more effective during this pandemic. Sorry.
While Andrew gets going, would like to let you know that we'll also have this available for all the note takers. The copy of the deck will be available for you at the end, as will a recording of the presentation.
Thanks, Jack. A little clicker malfunction there. So what do I hope that you get out of today's presentation? Basically, there are two things. I think there is a real opportunity for businesses to capitalize on the pandemic, that they can reinvent their businesses and really concentrate on putting in place frameworks that they've thought about doing in the past, but haven't had the time or the burning platform to do so. And secondly, there is a framework that I'm going to introduce to you for you as the CEO to take the message that you're trying to convey to the organization and ensure that it is getting clearly and concisely through to the front lines of the organization. As was mentioned, this session is called How to Manage. It is one of a three-part series. The first one that you can find a recording of on our YouTube channel is called How to Plan. And we will be doing another one called How to Execute in 2 weeks' time. So what's going on currently? The current reality, the new normal, those terms have been thrown around ad nauseum. The reality is this, that we still need to make a plan. We still need to assign work. We still need to figure out how to follow up on that work. And somehow, as the costs of delivering these goods and services are going up, figure out a way of making all of that better. The framework that we've developed in order to do so from a behavioral management perspective is something that we call active management. And it's based on the philosophy that the role of a manager is to remove the problems that are occurring with their people in order to make performance better. That's their role, is to remove barriers to performance. And there are 4 steps to that framework. The first is to make a plan. The second is to communicate the plan. Third is follow up on results. And lastly, problem solve. Now, there's nothing new or revolutionary in those 4 steps. But how you go about ensuring that your managers are effective in doing each of those 4 things is where the real magic lies. And I'm going to explain for each of those 4 at this current time what we see as best practices. So let's start with making a plan. It starts with what the plan is. And as I referred to previously in the How to Plan session, I talk about for essential businesses, there being 4 critical types of plans and specific things in those plans that you need. And for non-essential businesses, there are 4 types of plans that are required with specific things to be successful. So once you've established those plans, now you need to create a cadence for communicating it. I would argue that shorter is better now, that it has to be intentional. And what I mean by that is map out from you to your direct reports and their direct reports down, both as a group and individually, when are those touch points occurring, who's in those meetings, to ensure that there are no gaps, that that message is getting down to the front lines of the organization. The content of the message needs to be considered. So you as the leader have to be transparent. You've got anxieties right now about what's going on in the world, and it may be because your volumes are up or down. But being transparent about what those anxieties are going to accomplish two things. One is you want your people to be able to express their own anxieties so that you can deal with them. And if you as the leader go first, you're going to encourage other people to do so. And secondly, it shows humility, and it makes people appreciate how hard it is right now to be a leader of an organization with all of the unknown things that you're up against. You need to be laser focused. Our president, at the end of every weekly address, talks about the 4 most critical things in our business. It's the last thing he says. He said the same thing for 6 weeks, but it's crystal clear what we need to do as an organization in order to be successful right now. The timing of your cadence, and by timing, I'm not talking about frequency, I'm talking about time of the week. If the context of your message is supposed to be uplifting, then having it on a Friday or at the end of the week is probably the right thing to do, because you want people to go into the weekend with a peace of mind that things are going to be okay in the future. If your tone is more serious, if you're in crisis mode and your message needs to be cascaded down through the organization, then earlier in the week is probably better. And for larger organizations, I would say earlier as well, because it's going to take more time for that to cascade through. And focus on wellness in this more than numbers. If people aren't well, they're not going to be productive. Showing that you care, having questions and metrics designed around wellness will help to reiterate that. So that leads me to the second point, communicating the plan. I talk about the cadence in the audience, writing it down and being intentional with what you're communicating and when. Huddles aren't a new concept, and whether they're virtual or not, I think they're more important now than they have been previously, because there's a feeling of isolation. So bringing people together at the beginning of every day or every week or once a week is going to help to break that isolation. Starting with wins, you want the message and the tone of the meeting to be one that is positive. And I understand that if you're in crisis mode, it's not positive, but if you can find small bits of positivity, it helps keep people's spirits alive and keeps them engaged and realizing that there's still good things going on in the world. And then try to connect what is going on in other departments. The message that I'm delivering is one that I'll often refer to from a virtual perspective, but these fundamentals are equally pertinent whether you're managing virtually or managing people who are physically in front of you. And keeping people connected by understanding what's going on in other departments is another way of keeping them up to speed, like they would have been if everybody was physically together. The next point I would make, and I would encourage you as a leader to do, is be more present in meetings that the people that are reporting into you are running. It's having meetings and running meetings has always been something that people have struggled with and has been an area of opportunity. We're now asking them to do it more often. So if you can attend meetings that the people who report into you are running, it's going to give you an opportunity to coach them to be better at doing it. It's also going to help to ensure that there is alignment. So being present in those meetings, either physically or virtually, to hear what your direct reports are saying and see if the message that you're trying to convey gets properly translated is possible if you're there. The other thing to consider is that many companies right now are trying to determine what modes of communication should be done on what mediums, what should be done virtually, electronically, or face-to-face. There's going to be some grayness around that, and being there to help assess that is going to help provide some clarity in that regard. Connecting the dots. Think of when you were in the office, how much you picked up by overhearing conversations, being in meetings, listening to what people say after the meetings, having people drop in on you. If you're not there, there aren't as many dots for you to connect. Being present in these meetings will help you figure out if there are people who are working on things in one part of the business who can help people in another area. And the cadence, I talked about it before. You've shortened up the cadence most likely, but at some point in time, you're going to be able to go back to your old cadence or somewhere in between. You'll be able to better assess as an outsider, as an observer, when the time is right to shift that cadence, because meetings are becoming redundant. People are being meeting to death. There may be a different cadence that you can start to employ to give people back some of their time. The third step is following up on results. And it's important that you explain to your employees how you're going to do this. As I said before, communicating is not something that managers, generally speaking, are very good at. And so now, if it's done virtually, it's going to be even more clunky. But as a manager, even as a CEO, if you tell people that you're going to be trying out, asking questions around wellness, that now, as opposed to having drop-ins, there's more structure, that you're not sure how this is going to play out, it's going to, again, show humility on your part. And it's going to help start a conversation about how best those conversations take place. One-on-ones are something that have been around, but again, there needs to be a wellness focus to them. And I would suggest that there are 4 questions that should be brought into the one-on-ones. What's causing anxiety for you at home? What's causing anxiety from you at work? What might cause anxiety for you in the future at home, and what might cause anxiety for you in the future at work? And that way, you may not be able to solve the anxiety issues, or you might, but if you can't, at least you're getting an understanding of what the people who work for you have as triggers for anxiety. And if and when the likelihood of them of occurring in the future comes about, you can get out in front of them and be aware of them. And you've got to understand that you've developed a style on your own of how to communicate, but your people have their own style in terms of how they want to receive information from you. Some of you may have used DISC by Myers-Briggs, social styles. That's the one that we tend to utilize. It's important that you understand whether people want to be able to talk about things outside of work with you, or they just want direction and to be able to get the task done. Or they might want to be able to express their feelings to you. Whatever their style is, you're going to need to adapt your style of communicating with them. And the more open you can be and have a conversation with people about how they want to receive information from you, the more effective that interaction is going to be. One of the things that's common amongst a lot of the managers that we've worked with that are very good is that they have a high level of preparedness. They're planning ahead, they're thinking about what they're going to communicate and how they're going to communicate it. And we don't have that opportunity now to go back if we miss something. So preparing for the interactions that you're having with your people and your people are having with their people, again, has taken on a higher degree of importance. I now keep a set of stickies beside my computer with the names of people that I interact with. And so for our president, I keep a list of things that I want from him in order to make sure that I'm being as effective as possible. And I keep a list of things for the people that report to me that I want to go through with them so that they can be as effective as possible. And I think about how to best convey those things ahead of time. One example of how you might change how you prepare for meetings. And then the last part of the framework is problem solving. So training your managers on how to problem solve. And I say this because it is a skill that people need to be trained on. If you think of all of the things that go into solving a problem, what problem you're going to solve first, what the different options are, how you're going to communicate with those that are effective, doing a trial, evaluating a trial, finally deciding on which solution you're going to put in place, and then having the mechanisms to ensure that that solution is sustained and people don't build a workaround thereafter. Those skills are all trainable, and whether it's through the engagements that we've done or through Carpedia College, it's critical that we don't take for granted that those people have those skills, because as we've trained people, we've seen them become much more effective when they've got better at those sorts of things. You can also benefit from training your employees to analyze variances. One of the best engagements we had was with a pharmaceutical company where we took over 600 people, frontline workers, through a training program. So as they were working, they could better self-assess what was getting in their way, so that when their manager came to them to have a conversation about how things were going, they were better prepared to say these were the things that were getting in the way of success. And I think about last year, we did about 250 studies with managers where we spent some part of a day with them. In that study, what we found was only 0.6% of their day was spent actively problem solving. 56% of their day was reactive. The kicker is that at the end of those studies, we asked those managers to tell us how much of their time did they think they were spending actively problem solving. And the answer that came back was an average of 21%. So it's that gap in self-awareness, making people more aware of what is a reactionary problem or what is a proactive problem that you are working on, and then digging away at getting rid of the reactionary problems is something that you need to train your people to do. I haven't quite settled on this one, whether it's a task or a time-bound measurement, but I think at the end of every project, activity, or task that lies somewhere in the 5 to 15 day range, you need to build in a stop where you get the team that worked on something together and say, how could we have done that better? I was talking to a CEO of a benefit provider a couple of weeks ago, and they just started going back out and submitting proposals for work. And what she said to me was that this was one of the worst, from a quality perspective, proposals that they'd ever put together. And I don't think that's unexpected, but it's important that you formalize when and how you're going to determine how you do things better. Questioning the magnitude of data. It's been something that people have espoused for a while. I talk about it in a presentation that I give on world-class KPIs and dashboards. And on our website, there's a blog and a framework for coming up with the 8 to 10 most critical indicators that you need to manage in order to propel your business forward. And activity-based costing. I talk about this in the How to Plan session. Knowing the true costs of the goods and services you're providing now, which will have changed from what it was before, is something that you need to do in order to build a strategy around what it is you're going to sell in the future. Having more accurate data will help you make better decisions. And coaching managers, especially for those that are virtual. How do you do this now? So you can use platforms like Zoom. We've started using GoPros, walkie-talkies, even doing things over the phone. Doesn't mean that coaching has to stop. It just means that you've got to be creative if you're doing it virtually. And telling your employees, like I said, communicating expectations, telling them how you're going to do that, but also telling them once you've established how you're going to go about problem solving, that this is the new norm. And we find that if you can help simplify problem solving for them by giving them a framework, it's helpful. And the one that we have boils problems into 3 different buckets. The first is relations, the second is instructions, and the third is through methods improvement. Each of those have 4 steps. Again, a framework is a good start. It's a beginning. You need to have somebody coaching people through the framework in order to make it effective. So I think from the presentation that there are 5 fundamentals that ring true. One is that we have to realize that managers need help managing now more than ever. Second is that the cadence that you establish for your communication right through the front lines of the organization needs to be written down and thought through both from a group perspective and individual. Third, your ability to insert yourself more often in the meetings that your people are running will help to better shape the effectiveness level of the communication that's going on in your organization. Fourth, make sure you focus on wellness first. And lastly, think about a new approach or a reapproach as to how you problem solve in the organization. I started out by saying that I think this time is an opportunity for you to do these things, to employ this framework so that your organization is more effective now and coming out of the crisis. I'd like to thank Bill McGinley for a lot of the content in the workshop and remind you about the one in 2 weeks' time. And with that, Jack, let's open it up to questions.
Thanks, Andrew. We've got a few questions that rolled in as the presentation was going on. Some of them I think have been answered already, but I think it makes sense just to maybe touch on them quickly again. The first question that came in is right off the top, wouldn't it be best to identify the problems first?
Yes, and identifying the problems is part of the process when we talk about the planning and the setting up of metrics and using dashboards. So it didn't spend a lot of time on the identification piece because it's built into the framework in earlier sessions.
The second question is one that we get an awful lot, is more meetings. Why? I already have too many meetings.
And that's a fair comment. I would say that if your business is at a time in crisis and you've got people who are virtual, it's about ensuring that they are included. And that's why I said, if you can insert yourself in the process, I think human nature is such that people won't put their hand up and say that they have too many meetings as managers of people. Having an outsider will help ensure that that cadence is appropriate for the stage that your business is at. But in crisis mode, I think it's important.
If I can add on to that, Andrew, to tie into the next question about management effectiveness, it's part of this presentation, and over time we rarely come across, if ever, people that are purposely trying to do poorly by the business. People don't get up in the morning to go to work to say, I can't wait to underperform today. I can't wait to tell my family about how poorly I'm doing at my job. Everyone wants to do well. And the uncertainty, whether your team is still on site and there's new rules that they have to follow, or they're remote, the uncertainty around whether they're doing a good job comes through the management of the anxiety that Andrew mentioned and teaching them this framework. It also ties into the next question, do we teach this framework? And how we do. For the purposes of a longer discussion, please feel free to contact any of the people that you see on the screen. We're happy to discuss that privately and separately if you want to have that discussion. And that takes us through to all of the questions that have been there. Another one coming in through here. By sitting in on other people's meetings, how do I ensure that I do not infringe on their leadership? It's a pretty good question.
It's a good question. I think if you, similar to setting the stage in terms of this is going to be awkward, the communication that you are undergoing virtually, you can have that, you should have that same conversation with your leader and the team that reports into them, explaining why you're there, right? That it is a time where I'm not as good at connecting dots as I've been in the past, and it's helpful to me to be able to be here. I don't want to usurp the amount of transparency that you would normally have, but for the organization's sake, it would be a benefit if I can sit in.
I agree. This one, we've got 4 minutes left, Andrew. This one is more of a discussion point. It wasn't a question raised, but what are your takes on skip levels in these times?
What do you mean by skip levels?
So meeting with your, if you've got a team beneath you, meeting with their team directly in a one-on-one setting.
I don't know that I have a answer. I think it's a positive thing because it gives people who are at the lower levels access to people higher up, and there may be some anxieties that they might not be comfortable conveying to their manager, or they want to know more broadly about the president or the CEO's vision for the future. But it's got to be done transparently. And it's got to be done if you have a culture of trust. If you don't have those two things, then you're going to potentially cause more harm than good.
Yeah, I agree. My additional point you've covered a portion of was the transparency is key. You don't want the direct level of the organization that reports into you to feel like you're going behind their backs to dig up some dirt. And you know, the key theme is the transparency, the honesty, the humility, and making sure that we're dealing with people one-on-one.
Yeah.
I'll do a final call for questions and we'll wrap it up. I don't see any hands in the gallery, and there are no questions being typed in the Q&A box. So with all that being said, thank you for joining us. Andrew mentioned we have our part 3 in 2 weeks. Please join us. We hope that you find these informative, and if you have suggestions or if you think of comments and concerns that come up after the fact, we're happy to answer them. You have our contact information. The deck is available for download, and as is the video recording if you choose to share with others. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we hope you have a great week. Take care.